Hello and welcome to another EVE 101 video. This one is going to be primarily focusing on the offensive weapons between the different races, as well as some of the ammunition types that you'll be seeing. We'll be starting off here just at the bottom of this list, projectile turrets. Now, what the basic premise between what all the, at least the turrets have, the projectile turrets, laser turrets, and hybrid turrets, is that they have both long and close range primary groups. So, like for example, projectile turrets, their close range is autocannons, while their long range is artillery cannons. The autocannons do large amounts of DPS, but they don't typically reach out too far, while the artillery cannons can reach out to massive amounts of distance, but have a really low rate of fire and they can't really turn very fast. So basic starting off, the autocannons. So as you can typically see, I'm just going to be going through the smalls on each one. The autocannons, they get split up into different groups. The look of the 125, there you go, 150, and the 200. Now each one of these each one of these groups is then split up into subgroups. That's the different sizes. As you can basically see about how much damage each one's going to do and how much ammo they hold by how much power grid and CPU they take. So the small 125 takes up the least amount while the 200 takes up the most. This can give you a general quick look at about how powerful each one's going to be. So if you just sort of want something as just a backup support for something else like drones, and you have a little extra space to do it, then you put in the smallest ones of the group. If the guns are going to be the primary focus of your damage, then you go to the middle or the largest ones. Now, when it comes to autocannons, the one thing you have to remember with these is that they're the more versatile of the different weapon groups. They actually have a close to medium ranges when they get up into the medium sizes. So you can actually take quite a bit of damage from them from a varying range of distances. Depending on the sort of ammo type that the person's using, that's kind of hard to tell until they've actually started shooting you, and then you can test out their ranges. Otherwise, the big thing you have to memorize with these, just if you come up against somebody with autocannons, typically try to stay further away from them or try to go fairly fast around them since they don't have the quickest turning. Now, artillery cannons, these are actually the ones where these are the heaviest hitting guns in EVE. You won't actually find any guns heavier hitting than them, but they also take the longest to cycle, especially when you get into the larges, like the 1400s. Those will take 20 seconds to cycle, but you can easily one-shot cruisers with them. The big thing you have to memorize with these, get as close as possible when you come across artillery cannons. The reason why is because they can't really turn very fast. So, if you get within their ranges, then you'll be fairly safe against them, and the person won't have much to do. However, there are certain cases in which you have to be careful of that. If it starts happening where you start taking large amounts of damage close, try to then curve away from them, where you gradually increase your orbital distances around them by manually clicking around. Don't go straight out. The reason why you want to do that is because it means that whatever ship you're going against, it's fitted up to actually provide the damage, increase the tracking of the guns to the point where they can keep up with small ships orbiting real close to them. So that's projectile turrets. They're fairly versatile, but they don't have the longest ranges when it comes to the autocannons, or they don't have the huge amounts of DPS when it comes to like hybrid turrets. Next group is the missiles, which these are the more complicated, the ones for people to truly master and understand. The reason why is because they don't have set things which what the guns have. For example, with missiles, your distances and ranges depend on the actual missiles that you use. So, because since each missile, and I can show you up here, let's go to cruise, just one of these. As you can see right here, you have a max flight time of 14 seconds and the max velocity of 4,700 meters per second. This means that is as far as the missile can travel. It physically can't go any further. Now you can get skills and modules and rigs that can gradually increase these. It'll increase the speed, how long they can fly, and the damage they do, and a lot of other stuff. The other thing with missiles, and this is one of the big things that it actually changes as you go up, is that the larger the missile you have, the less damage you do to small targets. The reason why is just you have inertia modifiers you have to deal with, so they can't turn as much since they actually have to fly there. That's why you can actually see the missiles. Um, and that's when the explosion radius comes into play, since that's what's actually going to be doing the damage to a target. But it also means that you do less damage, since, like, for sense, to sort of put it in perspective, the missile explodes where the last position of when it exploded when the target was supposed to be, but the target actually has moved away from that spot, so it's only on the edge of the explosion. That's the best way of putting it. And each one does different types of damage, and so does all the ammo stuff. But when it comes to missiles, and it starts off at the smallest as being the rocket launchers. These, they are the close range, high DPS damage dealers of the missile world. 2 or 3 don't do much, but when they're on destroyers and you've got 7 to 8 of them all firing, they do quite a bit of damage. And especially since they have a very low need for sorry about that. Since they have a very low need for power grid and CPU, you can get a lot of them on and have a fairly decent tank on the target. And the best way of going through these is to look at them, see what they have, and also to look at the different missile types, since then you can determine about what you're going to want to need. And each group has 2 different sort of sets once you actually get into the heavy launchers. Since at the small stuff, the light missiles and stuff, they all really do the same rapid light. They just fire a bit faster. When you get to the heavy launchers, then you have like the close range, heavy assault, or the long range heavy launchers, which have different fire rates, and the missiles have different ranges. Otherwise, the damage stuff does about the same, and the only thing you can change with that is skills. Now, in lasers, these are the ones that can do the quick weapon changes. These are the ones where you really need to know the weapon type that they're using instead of the ammo type, since they can switch the ammo instantly. Once the weapons have done cycling, they can just switch out to any sort of weapon crystals they want to use. So pulse lasers are the close range, higher DPS of the lasers. So what they primarily do is they just sort of pulse, and you can see the visual animation of them pulsing and stuff. And they have fairly close range, fairly high tracking, but and they do primarily large hits of damage, but their cycle time stays about the same. They don't turn as fast. I don't believe so. I'm sorry, I have to be checking these. Yeah, well, okay, so their turning rate's about the same as the autocannons, but their primary change is that they can do more damage to shields and stuff, since that's primarily what their crystals do. But pulse are basically the same as the autocannons. They can't go as far though. In lasers, these are the long-range damage dealers. Um, they do take up quite a bit, as you can see here with the power grid and CPU, but they can do quite a bit of damage. Probably the biggest thing I'd have to say that can be a hindrance to laser users is that if the target's outside of your ranges, they can't do anything. You primarily have to make sure that they're within your fallout range to actually do damage. Autocannons actually have a chance of hitting outside of that. Lasers have almost no chance. You have to be within your optimal to really do lots of amounts of damage, or within fall off to actually hit. With hybrid turrets, the railguns are the long range. These can be some of the longest range guns at the small size. A good example was of a personal experience of mine. I was actually hit at 100 kilometers away from a cormorant, which is the Caldari destroyer, the original Caldari destroyer, not the missile boat. And I was hit at 100 kilometers from it. It did almost no damage, but they were able to continuously hit me at long range. So And that's their big thing. They can go fairly far with their distances, but they don't do very much damage. So that's their sizes. The second group, which are the blasters, these are the highest DPS guns in EVE, but their biggest downside is that they have almost no range. If you're at any sort of distance, I mean, sometimes, 10 kilometers away, these won't hit because they just, it explains there of how it just like it shotguns it and it just disintegrates right after it leaves the weapon. Now, when it comes to these three turret groups, the hybrid and laser turrets have a critical connection in with the ship, and that they actually use capacitor to be operational. So when you actually come across people that are using hybrids and lasers, one tactic to go against them is to actually use a energy neutralizer or energy vampire to actually drain their cap to the point where the guns no longer work and they'll just stop firing. While projectile turrets, the only thing that projectile turret users have to worry about is when their ammo runs low, and then it takes them 10 seconds to reload, or if they're using artillery cannons, it takes them large amounts of time to cycle their weapons through. And missile launcher users, they have to understand that their missiles have to travel the distance. Guns, they do the damage the moment that they're cycled, they fire and they do damage. Missile users have to understand that their missiles have to travel the distance. So when you're doing with long range stuff and you're at, 60 to 100 kilometers away, there's times when you can have two or three groups of missiles in the line before you actually do damage. So you have to understand that. Also, there is a chance that the target could actually be close orbiting you just so fast that the missiles just spin out. So those are things that you have to be very careful about when you're using the weapons. Now, the biggest thing when it comes to determining what sort of weapon each person uses is to know what each weapon looks like. To go through and to see, so, you look at this is a blaster. So you see the group there. And this is the highest damage dealing blaster that there is. While in the railguns, this is the middle damage dealing railgun. So knowing about which, whether it's a blaster or a railgun can determine how close you're going to be, how fast you'll try to orbit the person, and how much damage that they're going to be doing to you. And then you've got different types, so it's like that's the typical 125, and then you have another one which has excuse me on this one. For some reason, they all look the same. Just wait. There. See, this is the Tech 2 125. Noting the differences between the Tier 1 version and the Tech 2 version can be critical in whether or not you're going to live or die. Now, when it comes to ammo for turrets, the hybrid lasers and projectile turrets, when it comes to the standard types, you have three, fairly different groups. So you have starting out, and I'm just using projectile turrets because they're fairly easy to do for me since I'm primarily projectile turret user. So you have here, this one here is a longer range damage dealer, but they does almost no damage. You see there are only 1 explosive damage and 4 kinetic damage. While this group here has no range bonus, it does more damage, and it can also track a bit faster. While this group here does the most damage, but it doesn't shoot as far as the other two groups. So when you're actually using these, you have to understand, which one's going to be best for, for which types of fights. So, and a lot of times you're going to want to when you're just flying around typically for both PvE and PvP, just starting off with the mid-range ammo is going to be, the best one to go for, since it allows you to react to multiple situations between both close and long range targets. If a target is really close, is so close that your turrets can't, where it's too close, it sometimes happens, especially when it comes to the Tech 2 ammo, the specialized ammo, then this happens quite a bit where you're going to want to use the close range ammo because it's either really tanky or it's too close where your turrets can't actually track it properly. Or if it's too far away, then you can switch to the longer range ammo and then you can actually start doing damage to them right away. So that's some hints when it comes down to understanding, what type of ammo you're going to want to be using. When you're actually fighting somebody, you're not really going to know what sort of ammo they're using until they've actually fired upon you, since there's no actual visual cue of what sort of ammo they're using. It would be nice to actually see sometimes, but then that would mean that they would have to make really small models on the turrets and in the missile launchers on ships, and it would just take up too much room on their patches to actually do that. But it adds some variety when it comes to combat, and it can get hectic sometimes. I should also probably mention the Orbital Bombardment ammo. Um, it only comes in small, so that's one big thing you have to understand when it comes to it. And it's only used on Orbital Bombardment when in conjunction with Dust 514, and you need a ground unit in the game to set a point for you to lock onto, and then you fire it. And I haven't actually played Dust 514, but it's like the laser crystals are the most accurate, hybrid charges cover the most area, and the projectile turrets are in the middle. They do medium damage between the hybrid charges, but they're more accurate than they're less accurate than crystals, and yeah, that's how it goes. That's pretty much it when it comes down to weapons. The biggest thing I'd say for people to work on would be about the look of the turrets. Having, when you come up to combat with somebody, just doing a quick look at them, which is more helpful than you might think when it comes to PvP, since it does allow you to see what sort of turrets they're using. And knowing what they have can determine your own combat strategies. So getting used to doing the quick look at and then quick changing orbital path depending on the weapons can be helpful. So that's my biggest thing I'd say for people to work on. Don't typically worry when you're first starting off. Don't really worry about the the extra large, since these are only used on dreadnoughts and capital ship class stuff, and you won't ever have to worry about them, since basically if you see a dreadnought in a ship, you're going to be in a huge fleet and you'll already know how to deal with them. So that's my biggest advice. That's sort of the basic overview. I'm sorry if I didn't go over in depth of each type of turret, but that's basically how it is. Each all the turrets are split up into groups. Those groups are split up into two separate ones depending on high DPS and long range, and then those are just split up into subgroups for depending on how much typical damage that they're going to be doing. So, oh, and bomb launchers, but those are only nullsec. So thank you for listening to this. This has been the Mercs of Vengeance Eve 101 video master. Thanks for listening and watching. Have a nice day. Fly safe. Get a lot of kills.